The impeachment inquiry now in its fifth week, and House Democrats are bringing in even more people for questioning tomorrow. Bill Taylor, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine who was concerned about a potential quid pro quo over military assistance to Ukraine, even calling it crazy. NBC's Leanne Caldwell's on Capitol Hill. And Leanne, let's talk about Bill Taylor's testimony tomorrow. What piece of the narrative are we expecting him to sort of fill in?
What Democrats are hoping to hear from Bill Taylor is this idea that there was, in fact, a quid pro quo. We have a series of text messages that were released between Bill Taylor, EU Ambassador Sondland, and Special Envoy Volker. It's only a snippet of text messages out of all of them that have been released, but we have about few pages, 2 months worth, and there was two text messages that were really interesting. The first was the one that you just mentioned, where Bill Taylor said it was, quote, crazy that to connect military and security aid for an investigation into a political campaign. And so what Democrats are hoping to hear from Bill Taylor is to fill in all these gaps, not only what he was talking about in this text messages, but also all the conversations that he was having with Sondland and Volker outside of these text messages, because in another text message, Sondland responded to him, "Call me, let's not talk about this on text." And so there were definitely phone conversations that were also being had. And so Bill Taylor is someone who knows a lot about what happened regarding Ukraine, Allison.
Leanne, he's talking tomorrow. Who else is scheduled to testify this week? And I should caveat that with, can we expect them to show?
Yeah, so there are more people who are expected to appear this week, including someone from the Defense Department who was involved in the decision to withhold Ukraine, or maybe not involved in it, but knows about the decision to withhold aid to Ukraine. And so beyond the testimony that they've gotten over the past 2 weeks, where they really started to hear about this specific instance of what people were saying regarding the president and his relationship with the Ukrainian president, now we have kind of this subset of people who know the circumstance. So they want to know from this Defense Department official why aid to Ukraine was withheld, what the discussions were happening within the Defense Department, and how were they communicating with the White House on this issue. But you make a great point. We don't know if people who still work for the administration are going to show up, as we well know that the White House has really tried to block those people from testifying.
Leanne, we know over the weekend Mick Mulvaney walked back his comments yet again that the president held up military aid to Ukraine for political reasons. Could House Democrats ramp up pressure to try to get him to testify? And do we have a sense of whether his job is in danger? We kind of got that vibe last week, but now we're hearing some reports that maybe the White House isn't as upset with him as we once thought.
What's happening inside the White House changes on every hour. Mulvaney has been, the statement that Mulvaney said, what we do know is that White House lawyers were furious that he went on behind the podium and said that there was a quid pro quo. We also know that Republicans in the House of Representatives were also, their mind was blown. They couldn't believe that the chief of staff had been saying that when had been the Republicans' talking point the entire time that there was no quid pro quo. Do Democrats want to hear from Mulvaney? Absolutely. Are the chances that they do hear from Mulvaney high? No.
Okay.
But the fact that Mulvaney said something very publicly is going to play very prominently into the Democrats' investigation in this inquiry.
Leanne, we know House Republicans are trying to vote on a resolution to censure Intel Committee Chairman Adam Schiff tonight. What are we expecting to happen this evening?
So we expect it not to pass. What it'll probably happen is that what they call it being tabled. That means that it's not going to go anywhere. But what this resolution does is it's really a slap on the wrist. It doesn't even have any teeth. But it's a political ploy by the Republicans to show their base that they're trying at every step of the way to stop this impeachment inquiry and this investigation. And this is also going to give Republicans a lot of points with the president, who has been tweeting often and loudly about Adam Schiff. And so this is a political stunt that will get the Republicans and the presidents and the base's good graces. But it's not going to go anywhere.
In an interview over the weekend, Leanne, Senator Lindsey Graham did not rule out the possibility of impeachment. Let's listen to him for a second.
Are you open-minded if more comes out that you could support impeachment?
Sure. I mean, show me something that is a crime. If you could show me that, Trump actually was engaging in a quid pro quo outside the phone call, that would be very disturbing.
Leanne, we've seen Republicans break with the president on Syria and on having the G7 at Doral. Do you think we're going to see any shifts on impeachment? I love asking you about this.
I know. I mean, I think that what we do is we watch, pay attention to what Republicans are saying week by week to see how the tone is shifting. So that shift of tone from Lindsey Graham was quite interesting. Of course, he didn't come out supporting impeachment, but before he would say there's nothing there. But we also know that the Syria issue has been extremely frustrating for Lindsey Graham. Although it's not part of the impeachment probe, Lindsey Graham specifically could have been giving a warning shot to the president, like, be careful here. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this not only on the impeachment issue, but on other issues like Syria. So, I mean, the Senate we know that House Republicans are going to defend the president. They have nothing to lose by doing so. And when it comes to the Senate, it's those Senate Republicans that you have to watch ever so closely, the ones who are up in 2020 and the ones who are retiring. Does it get to 2/3 of the Senate? That seems like a very, very, very high bar. But this is making Republicans, some of them anyway, uneasy. Allison.
Leanne, one last question for you. We know House Speaker Pelosi led a delegation to Afghanistan and Jordan over the weekend. Do we know anything about the talks there?
We just know from their public statements that they went because they were concerned about the issue. They wanted to talk to the Jordanians about what's happening in Syria and the U.S. withdrawal, or mostly withdrawal, whatever stage we're in right now, of U.S. troops there. They also went to Afghanistan. They met briefly with Defense Secretary Esper, who also made a surprise visit to Afghanistan as well. This was not only a trip for substance, but this was also a trip for politics and symbolism as well. Nancy Pelosi and leading House Democrats wanted to make the point that they are extremely engaged in this issue and they do not agree with the president's decision on Syria.
Leanne Caldwell kicking off another very busy week on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.